So let me ask you something. Do you remember a mass shooting at a McDonald's sometime in the 1970s near a U.S. Army base? Well, a lot of people do. They remember it happening decades ago. They remember soldiers. They remember chaos. They remember it as one of those dark moments that feels like it should be a part of American history. And if that memory feels familiar to you, you're not alone. But here's the problem. That shooting never happened. There's no police report, no newspaper coverage, no trial, no record of it anywhere. And yet thousands of people are convinced that they remember it. So, how does something that never happened feel so real? Well, I want to show you how the human brain took two very real tragedies and accidentally fused them into a single event that exists only in memory. This is the story of a Mandela effect so convincing it created a mass shooting that actually never occurred. To understand how this false memory was born, we need to start first with the real tragedy that laid the groundwork for it. And that story begins in 1970 on a massive military base in North Carolina. Now, in the early morning hours of February the 17th, 1970, military police at Fort Bragg received a frantic call. The voice on the line was weak and panicked. "Help, 544, Castle Drive, stabbing, hurry." When officers arrived, they found the front door locked and the apartment dark. They entered through the back. Inside the master bedroom, they discovered something that would haunt investigators for decades. A young woman named Colette Macdonald lay dead on the floor, covered in blood. She was 26 years old and pregnant. Lying partially on top of her was her husband, Captain Jeffrey McDonald. He was a Green Beret and an Army doctor. He was unconscious, but alive. As officers moved through the apartment, the horror deepened. In one bedroom, they found 5-year-old Kimberly McDonald. She was beaten and stabbed. In another, 2-year-old Kristen McDonald, also stabbed to death in her bed. And written in blood on the headboard above Colette's body was a single word. P-I-G, pig. At the time, that word carried an unmistakable meaning. Just months earlier, the Manson family murders had shocked the country, and the phrase immediately raised fears of counterculture violence. Jeffrey McDonald survived, and when he regained consciousness, he had a story ready. He claimed he had fell asleep on the couch and was awakened by screams. He said 4 intruders had attacked him, 3 men and a woman. He described the woman as blonde, wearing a floppy hat, holding a candle, and chanting, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." At first, the story didn't sound impossible. This was 1970. The country was on edge. Fear of drug-fueled violence was everywhere. But when investigators began examining the scene more closely, things stopped adding up. The living room showed almost no signs of a violent struggle. Furniture was barely disturbed. Magazines were still neatly stacked. The weapons used in the attack, a knife, an ice pick, a wooden club, all came from inside the apartment. And then there were the injuries. Colette had been stabbed more than 30 times. The children had been brutally attacked. And Jeffrey McDonald, by comparison, had relatively minor wounds. His pajama top had dozens of puncture holes, but, his body didn't. Now, to investigators, it looked like the shirt had been stabbed while it was being worn. Slowly, a darker theory formed. They believed the crime scene had been staged, and what followed was years of legal chaos. The Army initially dropped charges. McDonald was honorably discharged and moved to California, but Colette's stepfather never stopped pushing for justice. The case was eventually reopened in 1979, nearly a decade after the murders, and Jeffrey McDonald was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. To this day, he maintains his innocence, and the case remains one of the most debated murder trials in America. Now, here's why this story matters. Because it left behind 3 powerful mental anchors: the 1970s, a military base, and the name McDonald. Now, keep those in mind, because 14 years later, another tragedy would occur and it would supply the rest of the false memory. The second story takes place in Southern California. It's 1984. A neighborhood in San Diego is just miles from the U.S. Mexico border. Now, at the center of it was a McDonald's. This time, the central figure wasn't a respected doctor. His name was James Oliver Huptree. Huptree was 41 years old, unemployed, deeply paranoid, and obsessed with firearms. He believed society was collapsing and that he was being targeted by unseen forces. In the days leading up to the tragedy, his mental illness state was unraveling. The day before, he called a mental health clinic asking for help. They took his name, they promised to call him back, and of course, they never did. On July the 18th of 1984, he kissed his wife goodbye and said something chilling as he walked out the door. "I'm going hunting for humans." He drove to the McDonald's near his home. It was mid-afternoon. The restaurant was full of families, children, and teenagers, a completely ordinary day. He walked in carrying an Uzi, a shotgun, and a pistol. He shot a 16-year-old employee near the counter. Then he fired into the ceiling and ordered everyone to the floor. For the next 77 minutes, he systematically turned the restaurant into a slaughterhouse. He moved calmly and deliberately, shooting anyone who moved. He fired through windows at people in the parking lot. He shot children hiding under tables. He even turned on a radio and played music as the gunfire continued. And by the time a SWAT sniper finally killed him with a single shot, 21 people were dead. 19 more were wounded. Now, at the time, it was the deadliest mass shooting by a lone gunman in U.S. history. The McDonald's was later demolished. Too much horror to ever reopen. This tragedy burned itself into the national memory because it shattered something fundamental, the idea that everyday places were safe. And now we have the second half of our false memory. McDonald's, a mass shooting, and unforgettable violence. So let's look at what the brain now has to work with. From the 1970s, we have a brutal, high-profile murder tied to a military base and the name Macdonald. From 1984, we have a McDonald's mass shooting so horrific it permanently altered how Americans viewed public safety. Two real tragedies separated by time, by geography, by circumstance. So how did they merge into one? This is where memory gets strange. This is where we leave true crime and enter psychology. The phenomenon behind this false memory is something called confibulation. It's what happens when the brain fills in gaps without realizing it's doing so. Your memory isn't a video recording, it's a reconstruction. So every time you remember something, your brain rebuilds it using fragments, emotions, images, headlines, and names. And, sometimes it grabs the wrong pieces. Here's how this particular false memory formed. First, the brain anchors to the 1970s military crime. The McDonald's case was everywhere. Books, TV, movies, headlines. It became the violent military crime of that era. Next, the brain simplifies the name. MacDonald becomes McDonald's. They sound almost identical, and over time, that distinction blurs, and then the brain supplies imagery. And for that, it pulls from the most vivid McDonald's-related tragedy available, the 1984 San Diego Massacre. Now, the brain has everything it needs: a decade, a military connection, a McDonald's, and a mass shooting. So it stitches them together. A shooting at a McDonald's near a military base in the 1970s, a story that never happened but feels complete. And here's the most unsettling part. Because the memory is built from real events, it feels real, carries emotional weight, confidence, and certainty. And that's why people don't just vaguely remember this false event, they swear by it. So we started with a ghost, a massacre that never was. We traced it back to a dark apartment in 1970 and a shattered McDonald's in 1984. And finally, we saw how the human mind, the storyteller inside all of us, stitched those tragedies together. The case of the Phantom McDonald's massacre isn't just a curiosity, it's a warning. Our memories feel solid, but they're fragile. And sometimes the most unsettling truth isn't just something didn't happen, it's how easily we can remember it as if it did. So let me ask you one last thing. If we can remember a tragedy that never existed, what other truths might be nothing more than ghosts? If there's a Mandela effect, you're absolutely convinced it's real, then tell me in the comments. I'm always fascinated by which ones have taken hold in our collective memory. And again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, tell a friend, and hit that bell for notifications. We got some more great stories coming right around the corner. This is The Dark Room.